Hello everyone. Today I would like to speak with you about the health of our ocean systems. It is a sustainable issue that is near and dear to me, and for a number of years I did not realize how bad the issue was. But first, some things about me. My name is John McCullough. I graduated from the University of Maine at Farmington with a Bachelor of Science degree in Community Health, with a school health concentration. For the past 6 years, I have been in public education, teaching health at Grey New Gloucester High School. Currently, I am a graduate student at the University of New England in the Applied Nutrition program. I chose this master's program because I have always had an interest in all things nutrition related, and more than anything, I enjoy sharing what I know with others. During this presentation, I will discuss the background of our ocean systems and how ocean pollution and unsustainable fishing affects the ocean's health by examining the causes. There are certain foods that contribute to this problem and a specific stage of production that causes the most harm. I will then provide potential solutions to these problems, followed by my own individual dietary changes, and discuss what you, the audience, can do to help through a call to action. Let's get started. The first concern that I will talk about is ocean pollution. Billions of pounds of trash and other pollutants enter our oceans each year. The form of pollution that is directly caused by our current food system is known as non-point source pollution, or NPS. This is a direct cause of a process that creates dead zones in our oceans, known as eutrophication. NPS is the result of land runoff, precipitation, atmospheric deposition, drainage, seepage, and hydrologic modifications. Examples include excess fertilizers, herbicides, insecticides from agricultural lands and residential areas. As a runoff occurs, it picks up and carries away natural and human-made pollutants, where it deposits them into lakes, rivers, wetlands, coastal waters, and groundwater. An analogy I heard recently does a good job of explaining it. Imagine a city street during a heavy rainfall. As the rainfall flows over the street, it washes away drops of oil from cars, particles from tire rubber, dog waste, and trash. The runoff will go to the storm sewer, where it will eventually make its way to a nearby river. Eutrophication is a condition caused by excessive amounts of nutrients in a body of water. There are certain nutrients that are of more concern, such as nitrogen and phosphorus. These are runoff nutrients from our current land agricultural system. This process results in the overproduction of matter in our oceans, namely algae. This overproduction blocks sunlight that is needed for bottom-dwelling plants, causing them to die. The ripple effect of this process causes the algae and plants to use up all the oxygen in the water as they die, killing aquatic animals through suffocation. In addition, algal blooms, which are large amounts of algae that release harmful toxins, seep into aquatic life that humans consume, causing sickness. What happens on land has drastic effects to what happens in our oceans. The United States is 2.3 billion acres of land. 1.2 billion acres of that is devoted to agriculture. So how does this affect our water quality? Every year, 500,000 tons of pesticides, 12 million tons of nitrogen, and 4 million tons of phosphorus are used to grow our crops. Those pesticides and nutrients make their way to rivers and streams and eventually find their way to our oceans, and this is happening around the world. If we are asking who is to blame for non-point source pollution, we cannot point the finger at just one thing. Although, as you can see, one contributor has a larger part in this problem than the rest. On the individual level, people in urban environments use more lawn and garden chemicals than are necessary, and there is not enough proper disposal of waste and the cleaning of oil spills. There are also certain mining practices and reclamation projects that contribute to NPS. Logging practices in forests causes soil erosion, and the 1.2 billion acres of land that is used for agriculture plays a large role. Monocropping causes soil erosion, which makes it necessary to use large amounts of nutrients to get crops to grow in the quantities needed to sustain the population. Those nutrients run off into the water supply, causing the issues mentioned earlier. Other agricultural issues occur with grazing systems that are not planned, and the proper disposal of pesticides, containers, and tank rinsate. Animal manure is also a big contributor to issues such as eutrophication. Unsustainable fishing has put a strain on our ocean's environmental health and devastated the aquatic life. There are varying forms of fishing practices, and while they do as they are intended, which is catching large amounts of specific types of fish or crustaceans, but it also catches and kills unintended aquatic life and leaves behind plastic fishing materials that harm the environment. It is these overfishing practices that have us seeing a steep decline in different predatory fish. As I said before, there are different forms of mass fishing that are conducted by industrialized fishing operations to maximize the number of fish captured. Unsurprisingly, they each come with significant drawbacks that are both devastating to the environment and deadly to all sea life. Bruce Monger has an excellent lecture about these fishing methods and their lack of care for ocean health. Bottom trawling is the process of dragging a net across the bottom of the sea floor to collect fish. And as you can imagine, the ocean floor is destroyed by this process, and many of the fish that are captured are not desired, so they are thrown back into the sea, often dead. The floor of the sea looks comparable to when a tornado runs through a small town. Surface longline fishing is essentially angling fishing on steroids. Thousands of baited hooks are thrown in the sea to catch fish like tuna or swordfish, and this process uses miles-long fishing line. Fish aggregating devices are placed in the ocean for large amounts of fish collected around. The devices are large nets deployed at depths of 300 meters all over the world. After about a week of fish collecting, a Persane net will capture all the fish at once. The current fishing practices are really wasteful. Scientists estimate that as many as 1.97 trillion wild fish are killed annually by the commercial fishing industry. As a result, many species are on the verge of extinction. This is especially troubling when you consider the other factors impacting the ocean's health, like point and non-point source pollution. The amount of netting and fishing line that are left in the ocean from fishing practices have traveled miles from their original source and are washing up on beaches and strangling sea life around the world. Since 1961, fish consumption has almost doubled and has a steady increase of 3.6% every year. This is twice the rate of annual population growth. The fishing industry will have a difficult time making substantial changes to its process due to the ease and profitability of the current system. The United States Department of Commerce said that in 2020, there were 1.7 million jobs, $253 billion in sales, and $117 billion in added value between commercial and recreational fishing. And again, if we're looking to point fingers at who's to blame, we can point in a few directions. The fishing industry as a whole displays a lack of care and compassion for aquatic life and the surrounding environment. As a result, there has been a substantial decline in fish abundance in our oceans. In the previous slide, I mentioned that fish consumption has increased by 3.6% annually since 1961. And this is primarily due to an increase in global population and humanity's appetite for fish. Consumers are a driving force in the need to capture as many fish as possible. Between them and the industry, it has been a recipe for disaster for the ocean's health. Finally, global subsidies for the fishing industry were $35.4 billion in 2019. The billions in subsidies are a direct contributor to our overfishing problem. The subsidies contribute to cheap fuel, vessel construction, and prices for the fish market. And despite all we know about the harms of these fishing practices and overfishing, we're not really making any changes. The food that the vast majority of Americans consume every day comes from the result of monocropping. Foods such as corn, potato, safflower, buckwheat, and soybeans are known as row crops, meaning that they are planted in rows, wide enough to be tilled and cultivated using agricultural machinery. This system, that is supported by governmental subsidies and consumer demand, damage both the land and the water. In addition, annual demand for fish is consistently rising, and the strain of the ocean food system is taking a heavy toll on the environment. The ocean is taking a hit from both the land and the sea, and as a result of our current agricultural practices. So monocropping is the process of growing just one crop species in a field over and over. Food like corn takes up millions of acres of land in the United States, and that is just one crop that is part of monocropping. Even though this process is happening on land, the nutrient runoff from growing crops in this way is a major contributor to the ocean's health. The three most common foods that are monocropped are corn, soybeans, and wheat. What I find the most baffling is the fact that the side effects of this process, like nutrient runoff from non-point source pollution and the soil erosion, it is all happening, and much of the food that is produced does not even go towards human consumption. It is primarily being used as feed for animals. And then crop rotation is essentially the opposite of monocropping. The premise is simple. Rather than farming with the same crop over and over, a few different crops are selected to maintain the health of the soil and reduce the need for added nutrients to the crops. It is therefore ridiculous that even knowing the benefits of this process, it is severely underutilized. As a side note, there are some serious drawbacks to this process of monocropping. One being soil erosion, which I mentioned a moment ago. If a single crop is being grown continuously year after year without change, the health of the soil degrades. The soil is stripped of all biodiversity, making it necessary to use pesticides and fertilizers to keep up crop yield in these fields. Later, we will discuss solutions to this problem. Forage fish, such as sardines, anchovies, chub mackerel, and herring, have a similar purpose as monocropped food. 40% of total wild seafood caught in forage fish, and it is being used as feed and to bait predatory fish in surface longline fishing. As I said, forage fish are used to bait predatory fish. Some examples of predatory fish include tuna, sharks, and swordfish. Unfortunately, due to our unsustainable fishing practices, predatory fish have had a steep decline in abundance by 90% since 1995. The three methods of fishing that I mentioned earlier play a large role in the ocean's declining health. This stage of production is where we see some of the biggest environmental impacts. Surface longline fishing, fish aggregate devices, and bottom trawling decline the abundance of fish, needlessly kill tons of bycatch, and leave behind equipment that further harms the environment and aquatic life. To break it down even further, bottom trawling affects 150 times more surface area each year than deforestation. This is happening on an almost unfathomable scale, and like I said earlier, most of the sea life that is captured using this method is thrown back into the sea dead. Keeping in theme with pointless ocean death, fishing aggregating devices and surface longline fishing both have unintended consequences. FADs are often left behind, and their plastic nets washed up on beaches and snag on coral reefs. Longline also contributes to bycatch both in the sea and the birds in the water. Each of these fishing practices have solutions that can be implemented immediately, but because they are not required to implement them, nothing changes. There are a number of policies that are enabling the current food systems that are affecting the ocean's health in such a negative way. Subsidies play a large role in these enormous food systems sticking to their current framework. With over $35 billion going to global fisheries and $325 billion going to the agricultural marketplace, there is not a whole lot of incentive to make meaningful changes. These are both support subsidies that encourage our current food systems and increase the negative environmental and ecological impacts. Later, we will explore some potential policy prospects that could incite real change. We have looked at how the world is contributing to our unsustainable ocean food system. But how do the choices we make as consumers affect things? For starters, what the majority of the United States and other countries are choosing to eat shows the industrialized food system that we're okay with how things are. They are getting positive reinforcement from all parties involved, except for from the ocean. And second, how we manage our own crops locally can either feed into the system or help make things better. Making the choice to use fertilizer on your crops or rotating what foods to grow have their impact on your community. I think we can all agree that change does need to happen, and sooner rather than later. Between nutrient runoff, polluting and creating dead zones in our oceans, and our fishing methods causing a steady decline in fish population and an increase in pollution, there are changes we can enact at the individual, societal, and political levels. As a community, there are plenty of things we can all do to ensure our impact on the ocean's health is minimal. A part of that does come from the work that is done on land. One solution would be for local community to become more invested in their conservation partners. Partnering with soil and water conservation districts will help communities understand the strategies for sustainability in their area. For many people, and I am including myself in this, there is a gap in knowledge about the ocean's health and what contributes to it, either negatively or positively. Access to more education in the community, whether it is through schools, community gardens, or events at farmers markets, that can raise awareness about more sustainable practices. To help reinforce positive behavior, we can provide certain incentives to help in the sustainability of local food systems, and by extension, contribute to the ocean's health in a positive way. And it does not need to be anything too extravagant or cost a lot of money, including practices like food gleaning at farmers markets so that food insecure community members can have access to fresh produce, or creating community gardens that anyone can take part in and benefit from. That being said, throwing money into programs that incentivize local farms to rotate their crops or use fertilizer, or use less fertilizer, can go a long way. So, to expand a bit more on throwing money at a problem, creating places where community members can properly dispose of their trash, pet waste, used oil, or household chemicals can cut down on runoff into the oceans. You could also hold regular meetings with the community to discuss needs, whether it be providing ways to clean up brake fluid or providing ground cover to help with soil erosion. The policy suggestions that I make will also be able to address local community needs. But it is always a good idea to have solid local foundation for sustainability. If communities around the globe had a stable foundation, then that could potentially drive the marketplace to make real, sustainable change to match demand. Progress could be made exponentially faster if we enacted certain policies to encourage farming practices to be more sustainable. To start, The world governments should stop subsidizing current agricultural and fishing practices for billions of dollars to keep things the way they are, and instead provide them with cash incentives to make meaningful changes. In addition, we could go another step further by making those changes part of the law. It may seem a bit redundant to pay industrialized corporations to follow the law. I know it sounds a little silly, but as we've seen in the past, they are willing to pay whatever fine to keep things the way they are, because they are making more money with things staying the same, even if they must pay a fine of thousands or even millions of dollars. To be on the safe side, we should make it a no-brainer for these corporations and local farms to make sustainable choices. Some specific policy that could be made with regard to agricultural practices on land would be mandating things that experts have been telling us work for a long time, but we have not done in earnest. Rotating crops will improve the soil's health on farmland, making it less necessary to add nutrients to the crops by way of fertilizers. Cover crops can actually reduce nutrient runoff by managing soil erosion, soil fertility, water retention, weeds, pests, and disease. It would increase the biodiversity of farmlands and would again decrease the need for pesticides and fertilizers. So it would be worth exploring these sorts of options by mandating these industrialized corporations to make these changes. The fishing practices that are devastating the ocean can be modified. By mandating the modification of fishing equipment, we could reduce bycatch in many instances. One example could be mandating that the companies that create the lines for longline fishing must add ribbons to the lines to act as scarecrows to frighten potential bycatch. Like I said previously, the subsidies that are in place are actually encouraging overfishing. And if we remove them and instead put that money towards making gear modifications and investing in more aquatic farming, also known as aquaculture, sustainable aquaculture, we could eliminate the worst of our fishing practices and have less of an environmental impact on the ocean. When the whole world is impacted by a huge problem, it is easy to say that what we do as individuals will not make any difference. I know I've had that feeling myself. But it is those individual choices that can really get things started. You can play your part by eating locally sourced fish that are caught sustainably. Eating only vegetarian or vegan would be best, but if you're like me, it might be difficult to give up your favorite food. So locally sourced fish is a great start. And if you don't know where to find sustainably sourced fish in your area, go to seafoodwatch.org and it will let you know all of the options in your area. It's a tiered list of fishing practices from fish in your area, and it will let you know if something was completely sustainable, if it's okay, and if it's something that you should stay away from. There are some types of seafood that are more sustainable than others. Aquaculture is becoming more popular and is raising sustainability seafood that require little to no inputs. Oysters, for example, are an unfed system that does not need outside nutrition because you can get it from microscopic plankton. Also, being an active part of your community to encourage the health and sustainability of those around you is one of the best things you could do. You can find great produce and seafood that have been sustainably sourced at your local farmers markets. The support you show your local farmers that are working sustainably will encourage them to keep up those practices, and it will help build a community around them. Work with your neighbors to create a community garden in your neighborhood with rotating crops that is open to everyone that lives in that neighborhood. You could choose to sell at a reduced price, or make it completely free for the neighborhood. Along those same lines, get involved in everything community related. Like I said before, creating a community garden in your neighborhood, or multiple community gardens even in your own town. If you want to see real change in how things are done in your area, write your legislators about sustainable policy and why it can make a difference for you, for your family, and for your community. Also, if you want politicians in government that fight for your sustainability, then find out their views on this important issue. Go to the ballot boxes and cast your vote for the candidate that shares your views. When I thought about my diet, I thought I was pretty healthy overall. Not to mention reasonably sustainable. My wife is a vegetarian, and I eat a lot of vegetarian meals. She has also been talking to me for years since I met her about making sustainable choices. Not just with food, but with so many aspects of our lives. I honestly thought I was doing great. I even exercise regularly, and I feel pretty good a lot of the time. Not to mention, I teach health to high schoolers, and I'm pretty knowledgeable about nutrition in general. All that being said, after tracking my diet on a typical day, I noticed some glaring things. The sustainability portion of my diet is certainly lacking, so let's take a look. The things that drew my attention immediately were all of the food I consume that are packaged and shipped to me from far away. In line 14, you will see Shrimp Mama Tom Yum noodles. I have been eating those noodles since I was a senior in high school when a foreign exchange student introduced them to me and my friends. This product is shipped from overseas, and I get a giant case of 30 every 2 or 3 months. The salmon I consume once per week in line 7 is also not locally sourced, and according to seawatch.org, it is also not sustainably caught, which was a really big upset for me, finding that out. Those are the 2 glaring issues I noticed. Some others were my choice of snacks that are packaged and shipped all over the country, where much of that packaging can end up in landfills or in our oceans. My love for Caramel Delight Girl Scout cookies being one of the offenders, and I'm sure many of you share that same guilty pleasure. And also, for just about every single morning, I have a bowl of Honey Bunches of Oats, and that's another love of mine that is a hard habit to break. As far as my own health, I do some things really well. Actually, there's just 2 things. For example, I drink plenty of water throughout the day. I also get enough calories for the amount of exercise I do each day. I regularly train for half marathons, and having enough energy and water is really important. That being said, there is a caveat of me not getting the most healthy and sustainable calories on any given day. The snacks that I have are not very healthy, nor are they sustainable. When making my substitutions, I tried to address those issues while also maintaining the amount of calories my body requires for my half marathon training. I typically burn between 800 and 1,000 calories just doing all of my runs per day. So giving up any sort of calories, I'm definitely hesitant on. So also trying to figure out food substitutions that match that lifestyle were important. I did not want to overdo my substitutions, though, because I wanted to make it something that I could realistically follow right away. So I kept some things, such as a bit of ice cream in the evening and a beer during dinner, for example. But I did address my unhealthy and unsustainable snacking by swapping in oysters and dried apricots for the wonderful mama noodles and Girl Scout cookies. The salmon would stay, since it is one of my favorites, but I would make a more concerted effort to get it from a sustainable source. The hope and the idea of this is that these few changes to my diet will decrease the amount of CO2 emissions from the food that needs to travel across the world to get to my doorstep. In addition, it will support food that actually helps with the ocean's health. The oysters that I will swap for snacks actually clean the ocean and require no inputs for them to grow and thrive. It doesn't hurt that I know a few oyster farmers that can get me them for a reduced to free price. And these dietary changes will be a stepping stone to make more impactful changes in the future. And it would also give me some peace of mind that I am trying my best to be more sustainable so as not to negatively impact the environment that my children will grow up in. And I can say for certain that it will be an absolute thrill to my wife that I would be making all of these sustainable choices. We can all play our part in politics and policy. We can affect change on the local and global scale. Research all of the candidates for an election and find out that one that will fight for sustainability. When you find these candidates, vote for them. This could be a vote for president, or it could be a vote for the school board or the city council. As we mentioned, there's plenty of things that we can do on the individual and societal level. And even as a country, there are things that we can do, and voting is one of them. And if you don't see a candidate that matches your beliefs, you could even try running for the school board yourself to help make sustainable nutrition policy. Or you could run for the city council to help shore up the sustainability of the farms in your area. Sometimes if you want to see a real change, you have to help make it. It is actually a little difficult to narrow down just 5 dietary choices everyone can make because there are so many things we can do to have a meaningful impact. That being said, here are 5 dietary choices anyone can make to help with the sustainability of the ocean's health, but also agricultural health on land. After saying that last line, it sounded to me a little bit like I'm setting up a Watch Mojo list, but anyway, number 1. You can start by buying sustainably caught seafood. It still tastes great and has all the same nutrients, but it does not hurt the oceans and does not lead to bycatch or pollution. Purchasing food with little or no plastic can keep our oceans clean and save aquatic life. Number 3, local farms and farmers markets can make a huge impact if you support them. The food you get from them will be more sustainable for many reasons. And if nothing else, they are nearby and the product you buy from them will be fresh and will not have released CO2 traveling to a store near you. Number 4, we can all make adjustments, and in some cases, we need to continue refining our choices. Things unexpectedly happen, and we need to reevaluate our diets. Maybe the farm you support shut down or was bought out, or previously reliable, sustainable food you have been purchasing for years has changed their practices. Check in from time to time to make sure you are making the most sustainable choice. And lastly, when in doubt, grow your own food. Knowing exactly where your food comes from and the practices involved are a lot easier if you were the one doing it. The best way to convince others to join in on sustainable practices is to actually model that behavior yourself. As Americans, we talk about the food we eat all of the time, and we ask questions about it. Speaking up about sustainability is a good way to educate those around you. I myself have a unique platform to discuss this topic as a high school teacher, but I am often consuming food around my students that they will occasionally ask me about. If others around see you at the farmer's market or in community gardens, they will ask you about it at some point. When they do, make sure you're prepared to talk with them about it and its benefits. And again, if you don't have a community garden, then start one. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I hope it helps you in some small way to make sustainable choices with the food you eat, and that you share this info with your friends and family. We can make a real impact on all of our food systems. We just need to get everyone on board and on the same page, and it starts with this: learning something new so that you can start thinking about how to take action. Thank you for listening, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask. And for the most exciting part, here are my references.